I'm Teri Allendorf. I'm the Executive Director of Community Conservation. We're here in Nepal. I'm about halfway through my trip. We've had the chance to do a lot already. Had the chance to go out with Sam Hella and help her start her tiger project for her PhD dissertation. We were visiting the field sites where she hopes to work around the city of Butwal, which we think, or which we know, is a bottleneck for tiger trying to get across through this large urban area that's also associated with a large river. So she wants to see if tigers are crossing that and if the two populations of tigers in Nepal, the west and the eastern, are actually interbreeding. So we had the chance to go out and walk around some community forests looking for footprints and scat. We did see some footprints, especially on the east side, because that's close to Chitwan National Park. So we know that they're pushing up against Butwal from the east side. We also went to the west side, and there's fewer tiger there. They have to come a lot farther from the protected areas like Banke and Bardia National Park to get there. But there have been signs seen there before. We also had the chance when we were out there to try and go visit bog harilu, or tiger rangers, that my colleague at the University of Minnesota worked with about 20 years ago. He trained local people to try and track tiger and look for sign and have the communities report when they saw tiger, as a way to find out, again, if across this entire landscape where tigers were moving and how many possibly. He was trying to use local people and build their capacity and knowledge to actually begin to monitor wildlife on their own. So we went looking for 5 of those people that he trained 20 years ago, and they were very excited, and they still had materials from the training that BIM had given them. They had their ID cards that BIM had made that, officially made them tiger rangers. And it was interesting because when BIM and I did a study looking back then at what benefits they perceived they'd gotten from participating in the program, one of the benefits was their increased social standing, because they had become experts on tigers in their communities, and the communities recognized them for that. So these ID cards 20 years later, you could see, was still a source of pride for them. We also spent a couple of days at the Lumbini Crane Sanctuary, which is part of the birthplace of Buddha, which has been developed as a religious site over the past 40 years. The International Crane Foundation has had a site for Saris crane on the northern end for about 25 years or so. It was actually one of my original research sites when I was doing my PhD and looking at people's perceptions of different types of protected areas in Nepal. They're starting to put in new trails for the wetlands so that it could become more of an important birding site. It's already recognized as an important birding area, but there's really not many tourists yet that are coming there. It's not developed yet so much. We've been talking with ICF a little bit about working with them potentially, getting communities involved in the learning center. How can it impact local people, or how can we extend, some lessons to the broader communities in Nepal through a learning center there. Most recently, we spent a couple of days with Community Conservation Nepal. They're currently doing a project with WWF Nepal to look at representation and inclusivity in the buffer zone. So specifically, they're going around in the buffer zones of Chitwan and Bardia National Parks and looking at how represented women and marginalized and indigenous peoples are on both the community forest user group committees and on the buffer zone management committees. We think those numbers, we know anecdotally those numbers can be pretty low in some areas, and that some of the election systems disfavor the marginalized people and women. And so they just want to collect the data and understand some of the barriers. And it was nice to see the team go out in the field and see them doing maps of where Taru used to traditionally use the protected area, for what resources and which grasslands, which forests, and the river areas also. A lot of marginalized peoples depend on the fish in the river. Nepal is an amazing example of community conservation, and most researchers and scientists and project people have incorporated that idea into their thinking, but there's still a long way to go. And there's a lot of things that can still be improved, and that's why we're here in Nepal. But we also think Nepal is an amazing example to share with our other community conservation projects around the world. And some of the other countries I've worked in, you can see that lesson that communities are important is still not really understood by people, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And Nepal is a great example, and because it's a small country, I think it's sometimes overlooked in terms of what it's achieved. So the next trip, in my last week or so, we're going to try and head east and go visit our pangolin project. I'm excited to visit the communities out there. We started to do some camera trapping. We've done it in about 3 community forests now, but I want to go out before we start again and meet with those communities and see how they felt the camera trapping has gone, if they felt like they were involved enough, if they understood technically what was going on, and we want to share the photos. It was pretty amazing, even though we were camera trapping for pangolin, and we got some amazing shots down inside of burrows. They also got a lot of other species of wildlife on the camera traps that were set in more normal places on trees. So we're excited to share that with them and get their feedback on how we could improve camera trapping as we move forward. And then ultimately at the end of the program we'll be writing pangolin management plans with the different communities that we're working with. Really one of the next steps for community forests in Nepal is to do their own wildlife monitoring and to have their own camera traps. This isn't a radical idea, it's just one that takes a lot of time and effort to get to all of the communities and try and build their capacity to monitor their own wildlife. The type of grassroots level efforts that we're doing mean that any amount of support that we get from you is really important, right? From buying one camera to training one community. These are not huge sums of money. We can very effectively really spread this message with any amount of support that we get from you, and it is truly appreciated, and we can't do it without you.